I had this interesting memory pop into my head. I had a colleague of mine share with me a research study on empathy. And he said, what's really interesting is in the study, when they looked at empathy over people's generations and their life, he said, you start off with kind of lowish empathy in your early 20s, and then it gradually goes up and up and up and up. And then it comes to a point where right around 55, 60, it starts to kind of plateau and then drop off a little bit. And it's almost has to do with what you just shared, because we're not trying new things. We're not exposing ourselves to new things. We're getting more kind of rigid because we're maybe playing small, or we're getting stuck in a routine. It's just limiting our ability to grow even in that way. So I thought you really said some important points there.
Well, there's another empathy tie-in that just fascinates me, which is that we show less empathy for other people when we're feeling insecure ourselves. And so if I'm feeling like I'm really an imposter, psychologists call this the spotlight effect. And it basically says that I feel like there's a spotlight being shown on me, and it almost blinds me to everybody else in the room. And so because I'm paying so much attention to all of the stupid things I do, I assume everybody else is as well.
Right.
And so we also see the correlation there. And that's why part of the reason why empathy is so low when we're in those awkward teenage years and trying to grow up is because we're so self-focused. We can't really get out of our own way and see somebody else.
Folks, our topic on the Workplace Therapist podcast today, wait for it, imposter syndrome. And if you're like me, you felt this at some point, maybe even the last year. I'm dealing with it right now as I'm coming through the pandemic and out of the pandemic. And I'm finding myself back in the classroom, feeling really nervous and uncomfortable. So if you've ever had the experience of feeling like you're not enough, not sure what to do, maybe you fooled people to get into your role, that's what we're going to talk about here today. And my guest today is Carolyn Goerner. She is the Aldi Incorporated Distinguished I-Corps Clinical Professor at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University, Bloomington. And Carolyn's been teaching in Indiana for 22 years. She is really an expert in this space, but more than that, she's an absolute pleasure. I loved our conversation. Carolyn not only broke down the costs of imposter syndrome, but more importantly, what can we do to get through it? So listen really close, take lots of notes, and at the end of the show, as I usually do, I'll share all of my notes, because I think if we listen really close and focus on this, it's going to help us overcome this nasty thing we call imposter syndrome. I'm Brandon Smith, and you've known me as the workplace therapist. My passion and purpose has always been to cure workplaces from dysfunction and to make your work life better. But did you also know I'm the co-founder of the Leadership Foundry? Well, in addition to our platform, we're excited to share that we're launching the Leadership Foundry podcast this January as a result. This podcast is free, and these curated episodes will answer the questions you have as a leader right now. Things like, how do I more effectively delegate so I'm not doing all the work of my team? How do I communicate more effectively so we're all on the same page? How do I manage my time and help prioritize? And meetings. We all know meetings are such a pain for all of us. Catch these episodes and the first episode on January 10th on iTunes, Spotify, and your other favorite podcast platforms. Carolyn, I am so thrilled to have you on the Workplace Therapist Show podcast. I'm just so excited for our conversation here today and talking about imposter syndrome. And I think everyone, in fact, I'm going to change my term here. I know everyone listening, myself included, has experienced that very uncomfortable phenomenon. So before we jump into this very critical topic of imposter syndrome, just for my listeners that maybe haven't encountered you before, could you share a little bit more about what you do today and what got you so passionate about this topic?
I'd be glad to. I hate to actually start with the childhood, but it's relevant, I promise. I grew up in a farm town outside of Bakersfield, California. And to say that we were a little behind the times is probably an understatement. So from the time I left after high school, I've always felt a little bit like a fish out of water. Like I was faking it, maybe a step behind everybody, just not really fully comfortable wherever I happened to be. But I'm also a competitive little sucker. sucker. So I decided that I was going to do a career in consulting, and I was going to go do my master's and my PhD, and I was going to become a professor. And I've actually been on the faculty at Indiana University's Kelley School of Business for 22 years now. And
Wow.
so it's been a great journey, but the whole time there's been this fog, for lack of a better word, of my feeling like I wasn't quite ready to be wherever I was. And I thought it was my dirty little secret. I thought that the fact that I was feeling the fear and doing it anyway meant that this was me feeling it. Everyone else seemed to have their lives together, and I was confident that I was the odd man out. And then I learned something that literally changed everything for me, which is that more than 70% of us have felt this way. And that kind of blew my mind. I realized everyone else was also faking it and thinking we had it together. And so when I started talking to people about it and asking questions, particularly of senior women ahead of me that I thought had everything going on perfectly, they were expressing the same feelings to me as well. And that changed a lot. It changed my mentoring relationships with my mentors because they were willing to admit how they felt and how they worked through it. And then it turned around and changed my mentoring relationships with my students, because it's always when you're in a high pressure, high profile situation that you feel this most acutely. Or when you're learning something new, you feel it more deeply. And so my students who are moving into MBA programs, you never feel as stupid as you do your first year of graduate school, right? That's just a thing. And so when people are acknowledging this all around us, it just makes for such better conversations. And we have an opportunity to support each other better. So that's where my passion came from, was having lived it for more years than I care to count. And finally realizing that not only am I not alone, but that talking about it is the best thing I can do for other people.
So great setup. And I love the way that you just told how this has been such a journey for you, because it really leads me to a lot of questions. So here's my first question. What does this cost us? When we have this feeling of imposter syndrome, what are some of the downsides to this that you've either you personally experienced or you've seen with all of your students and other leaders that you've talked to?
Well, the first thing is that we play small. We are going to only do things that are already within our current comfort zone. If we see that there's going to be a learning curve, we figure, well, this is going to be the time when people figure out I'm not as smart as they think I am, so I better not take that risk. That's one thing. Another, and this one surprised me, but it's so true in my own life, that if you feel imposter syndrome around something, it's very likely that you're procrastinating on it. And so it's a huge source of procrastination. We aren't starting something because we're scared of it. And so we not only will put it off, but then we can use that as almost a self-sabotage that says, well, if I'd had more time to do this, maybe it would have gone better. So that has a piece of it as well. Then, I don't have to tell anybody that an extra layer of stress is costly, right? I mean, none of us needs that. And to have just that extra layer of doubt around everything we do is an issue. But the one that scares me the most is that it really does keep people from trying to learn new things. So anytime we learn something new, there's a couple of different things that can kick in. One is this is going to be too difficult for me to learn. But then there's another type of imposter that Dr. Valerie Young, in her book, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, she calls this the natural genius. And basically it means that if I can't do something the first time really well, then it's not because what I'm doing is hard, it's because I'm not good enough.
Oh, wow.
And so it keeps us from, if we can't do something right the first time, we may not try it again. And that really holds us back from a lot of different opportunities.
Wow, fantastic. I mean, I can hear all those negative things as you were talking. I had this interesting memory pop into my head. I had a colleague of mine share with me a research study on empathy. And he said, what's really interesting is in the study when they looked at empathy over people's generations and their life, he said, you start off with kind of lowish empathy in your early 20s, and then it gradually goes up and up and up and up. And then it comes to a point where right around 55, 60, it starts to kind of plateau and then drop off a little bit. And it's almost has to do with what you just shared, because we're not trying new things. We're not exposing ourselves to new things. We're getting more kind of rigid because we're maybe playing small, or we're getting stuck in a routine. It's just limiting our ability to grow even in that way. So I thought you really said some important points there.
Well, there's another empathy tie-in that just fascinates me, which is that we show less empathy for other people when we're feeling insecure ourselves. And so if I'm feeling like I'm really an imposter, psychologists call this the spotlight effect. And it basically says that I feel like there's a spotlight being shown on me, and it almost blinds me to everybody else in the room. And so because I'm paying so much attention to all of the stupid things I do, I assume everybody else is as well.
Right.
And so we also see the correlation there. And that's why part of the reason why empathy is so low when we're in those awkward teenage years and trying to grow up is because we're so self-focused. We can't really get out of our own way and see somebody else.
But what you're reminding us of is that while we think we're working with adults all day long, we may actually be working with kiddos at various ages and stages stuck in adult bodies.
Absolutely. Doesn't that explain a lot?
Sure does. Sure does. That's why no one will have lunch with me. I'm not cool enough. I'm not invited to the cool kids table. Oh, well.
No.
I'm
Never
you
been
know
a
what?
cool kid.
I'm used to it. That's pretty much my life. You get used to it. Okay, so you hit some really important points there. We play small, procrastination, stress, which we could also extend to anxiety, keeping people from trying new things. Boy, how do we start the process of overcoming that? So we get this feeling of, I don't know if I'm going to be successful in this role, or I don't really know what I'm doing, and I don't want anyone else to know. How do we start to push through that?
Well, I'm on the right podcast, because the very first thing we have to do is talk about it. It is absolutely something where if we don't have conversations where we're candid enough to say, man, I'd like to do this, but I'm really scared, or I'm doubting my ability to be able to take this on. If we don't have those conversations, we're going to keep making it bigger and bigger in our heads. But when we talk about it, it becomes more manageable. Not only that, oftentimes when I say something like, well, I'm kind of afraid to learn how to sew because I don't think I'll be very good at it, which, by the way, is true. I've postponed a sewing class 4 times now. But the whole idea of my just saying that out loud, we're laughing. And so if I can get to a point where I can make a joke of it, it puts me in charge. I have named my inner imposter. His name is Imposter McFraudy. It is a him. I don't know why. And just being able to look at yourself in the mirror and go, oh, hi, McFraudy's back. I know you. I have a girlfriend that I can text, and that's all I have to put in the text. McFraudy's back. And she has a name for hers too and can do the same for me. And so whenever we need to have the conversation around, this is scaring me, or I'm feeling like I might not take a chance, or I might be holding myself back, we talk about it. And that's made all the difference in the world. It's finding people who know you and believe in you realistically, right? You don't want somebody who tells you, oh, of course you can go be an astronaut, when that's not going to happen. But you need somebody who realistically knows who you are and what your accomplishments are and what you can do, and have them have that conversation with you that says, all right, you're being silly. Or we'll actually sit down and break down with you what you have to learn. And once you can get that written down, it's a lot easier, because then I can just check it off and off I go.
Okay, so this sounds a lot like, I like to use the analogy of Aikido, the martial arts form Aikido, because the whole idea of Aikido is you don't attack your opponent, you kind of redirect their energy.
Yes.
And so this is almost like, our own personal form of Aikido. But here's the trick that I'm hearing in this that I really need your help us getting through.
Okay.
It seems like the fundamental issue with imposter syndrome is that feeling of weakness or vulnerability. And yet the antidote is to just expose that. So
Yes, I know.
be vulnerable and weak with other people, which feels so uncomfortable in that moment. I don't play golf anymore, but it used to be when I would play golf, anyone who's ever taken a golf lesson, the first thing that you're ever asked to do is change your grip. And it's always into something really awkward and uncomfortable, like you're twisting your wrists around and wrapping your fingers up. And it's like, I don't want to do that. But it's designed to help get you more comfortable. So given vulnerability seems to be this hinge in all this, how do we embrace that? Because it's really hard for people, hard for me included.
Oh, vulnerability is it's so funny because we think of it as a weakness when in reality, it's one of the strongest things that we can do. And it takes more courage than almost anything else that we can do. So yes, I completely agree. For me, the linchpin was always 70% of people are feeling this too. And being able to recognize that this is not going to be a conversation where I am the only one who is going to bring this to the table. And in fact, since imposter syndrome mostly strikes high achievers, the people that I would want to learn from are very likely the ones who have felt this as well. And so I often find that the conversation starts really well with a question. And sometimes it's, hey, I was just listening to this podcast and heard about imposter syndrome. Is that a topic that you know? Sometimes it's, wow, you always seem so confident. How do you make that happen? And usually someone who's honest will start to laugh at that point and reply, boy, have I got you fooled. But there's a whole sense of just bringing it up, just asking about it. And honestly, more than 70% of the time, people are going to say, oh, thank goodness you said something. I feel exactly the same way.
I love some of the ways you set that up. I was almost thinking in my mind, you could go up and say, I'm asking for a friend.
Oh, totally asking for a friend. Yeah. Or my favorite with my students is, well, some folks have told me, right? Some people have said, but where I really think the conversations can be the most meaningful is with people who are in sort of more senior positions and are mentors. And I think it's incumbent upon us to say, man, I may make this look easy, but you can't see all the stuff going on. It's like a duck, right? You can't see the legs going crazy under the surface. It just looks like I'm gliding. And so my message now is for women who are, my age and moving into those more mature career stages, so that we can say, when we talk about it, it normalizes it and it makes it easier for other people who don't have the power or the stature that we do to talk about it as well. So I think the less vulnerable of us need to start the conversation.
I love that. And I think that is such a great call to action because it really is an invitation. It's an invitation. So 70% of the people could be my new friend, right? And you're bringing people in, but also made me think as you were talking psychological safety. Right. Yes. We start off with this and we say, hey, look, I don't have all the answers. I'm not perfect. And then all of a sudden it just takes away some of the pressure in the room. And now people feel more free to ask for help earlier or share a half-baked idea or all the other things that we get when we feel more psychologically safe versus this, I got to be perfect because she's perfect or he's perfect. When reality is they're just, on a journey like all of us.
Yes. And the more we realize that humanity, that shared sense of we're all just doing the best we can, I think it really changes a lot of our perceptions about ourselves and each other. It makes us more forgiving of ourselves and each other.
So I have a question that I'm afraid to ask.
Oh, please don't be. Go for it.
Here it is. And you're going to hear why I'm afraid to ask it. Does this ever go away?
No.
That wasn't the answer that I wanted, Carolyn. That was not the answer. It's supposed to be like 3 steps and then, or as soon as you hit 50, it goes, or, whatever, there's some like magical. No,
I'm pushing 60. I'm hoping for 60, but I don't know. We'll figure something out here. No, it doesn't. But what does happen is that those feelings become less powerful. And so you're able to laugh at them. You're able to name them more quickly when they show up. You're able to get that self-talk under control before it bubbles up and starts to get bigger in your mind than it actually is. It's one of those things that you sort of have to be aware of. And so someone described it once as, well, I've got a bad knee. And so every once in a while it twinges. And I know that when it twinges, I probably have to put some ice on it. Right? It's kind of psychologically the same thing. Well, this twinges once in a while, and the more healthy I am, the less it twinges, but it's never going to completely go away. And so I just need to know the strategies that I can use when I start to feel that it's becoming a problem. And that's where we then start to say, oh man, there's a lot of different things that you can potentially do. One is to talk about it. One is to write about it. In fact, my current project is a 30-day journal giving people prompts to write about what's happening with imposter feelings and how to work through those. And so there's a whole series of things that we can do to change the self-talk internally. Talking about it is a major source of confidence. Going to a coach and talking through the feelings of why I'm going through this, or what it is that I'm truly afraid of, is another way that we can work through that well. But fundamentally, it's that support group where you feel psychologically safe enough to say, man, my imposter syndrome really hurts today. And you have then the opportunity to have someone say, all right, well, tell me about it. And not, oh, you shouldn't feel that way, but acknowledge that it's a thing. Tell me about it. And what does it feel like? And what are you afraid of? And how do we get you through it? And so it's normalizing the conversation that really is at the core of what it is that we're talking about.
What role does trying new things intentionally, putting yourself in uncomfortable situations intentionally, play in maybe making this muscle a little stronger for us? Does it at all?
Yes, absolutely. The more we can accept that we aren't going to be good at everything, the better we are at just accepting that we have strengths and we have not so strengths. And that's a really nice way to be able to manage it. Also, it makes you comfortable with the learning curve. And so realizing that if you're really good at something, I'm gonna steal from Idina Menzel here. For the listeners, you do know who this is because you've heard "Let It Go." If you have children, you've heard it incessantly, and that's her. She's also one of my favorite Broadway performers, and she made a comment that if she reaches a point in a performance where she is hitting 90+% of everything right, she needs to be singing something harder.
Oh, interesting.
And I love that because it says if I am perfect at everything I do, I'm not growing. I'm playing too small. And so I think the better we get at that whole notion of, well, just try it, right? Just go see what happens and do something. Yeah. I've also done the golf thing, but I have to stop because I laugh too hard at myself. And I just like doubled over on the golf course because I'm so bad.
There's no laughing in golf. There's no laughing in golf.
Well, then you and I can never golf, my friend, because not a thing. But if you can reach that point where you're just like, okay, this is funny, then I think we're at a more healthy place. So yeah, give it a shot.
Now, did I understand this right? Did you once try out for like a Broadway show?
I did.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah. Knowing full well that I was never going to make it.
So what? Tell us about that story.
Well, I did my last year of college in New Jersey. So I was a train ride away from New York, and I'm a theater junkie. The first step is admitting you have a problem. And so I am an addict. It's a thing. And I have been my whole life. And so I thought, you know what? I've seen all of a chorus line had just come out. It was big. I'd seen all of these. Here's what it looks like backstage. And I just kind of went, I want to know what that feels like. And yeah, I'm probably going to waste somebody's time. Okay, I am going to waste somebody's time. But I want to know what that feels like. So I found one that didn't require you to have an agent to get in and went and was really glad I wasn't first, because everything I thought I'd planned to do, I didn't do, because the people in front of me did something totally different. Wound up pulling a Shakespeare monologue out of my ear. I'm still not sure where it came from, and I'm confident it wasn't right. But I had a blast. And it was more because I was looking around with absolutely no expectations, right? I am a great audience member. I ain't never going to be on Broadway. It's just not a thing. And it was so extreme that it just made me stop and say, well, let's just see what this feels like. Zero expectations. And I have a better appreciation for theater, and I have a better appreciation for what actors go through. And I loved it. It was one of the first things I ever did like that in my life, which is why the story is so important to me. It was always, well, if I'm going to do something, I want to win. And to actively go do something where I knew that, heck, I wasn't even going to finish, was really eye-opening and fun. And it was my first experience doing something where I didn't feel like the objective was to win. The objective was just to learn and be there. And I'm not going to tell you, I can't lie. I'm not going to tell you that I do that with everything in my life right now. I'm still a competitive sucker, but I don't have that same sense of, well, everything I do, I've got to win.
Right.
And that was really important to work through.
I think that's fantastic. I really admire that and need to take a page out of that playbook. Because sometimes I always go into things, well, not sometimes, often I go into things thinking the stakes are high. Like, this is a big deal. Like, I've got to do well. And sometimes there are stakes, but sometimes there's not.
Yeah.
So here's a question I want to start to land our plane with. Here we sit, we've kind of ended this pandemic-ish, and we're moving into normal-ish.
Ish.
And for a lot of folks, they have not been trying new things the last 2 years, other than new Uber Eats, perhaps, like what's a new restaurant I can order from, they'll come to my house, or new things they can order online. And so the notion of going back out into the world can be challenging. I know even for me, I'm starting to teach again back in person, and I'm finding myself a little more nervous than usual.
Yes.
A little rusty. Because I haven't been exercising that muscle, and I'm finding myself getting a little more flustered in the beginning than I used to. Has me really wondering how my keynotes are going to go this year, to be honest, Carolyn. But we will see. So what kind of advice would you have for us as we're starting to push ourselves back into normal? Because I'm sure some folks are really reluctant to do that. Maybe they've got a little bit of imposter syndrome around that too.
Well, and yes, and I also think that some of that is just every time we think we're safe, something happens. And so we need to acknowledge that there's definitely a sense of real, not just psychological safety, but senses of physical safety that we need to think about as well. The other thing is, when we don't do something for a while, we go backwards on the learning curve. By the way, I'm doing exactly the same thing in the classroom. So, oh my goodness, do I understand what it is? And it's, I think, important to acknowledge that we can't expect ourselves to just dive in exactly where we used to be. We have backed up. We have gotten rusty. We have not had the practice, and just acknowledging that is helpful. I'm over preparing for classes now. I'm preparing maybe like I used to 5 to 7 years ago, because it's a different thing now to go in. And at first I had the expectations of myself that I was going to just walk in like nothing had ever happened. I think a lot of us did. And it's important to recognize, no, something really did happen. And we're all different people in some really fundamental ways as a result of that. And so realizing that the learning curve is back. You may have thought you'd even Phil Mickelson, if he doesn't play golf all the time, is rusty when he goes out there, right? And so having that expectation that it's not always going to be easy. There's another piece that I feel like I should not neglect as we're talking about that. And it is that there are times when it's not us with imposter syndrome, but it's the environment really giving us good reason to feel like we are under scrutiny and perhaps not belonging. And so if we're going back into environments where we are the only one like us in the room, we are the only person with our perspective, be that, or our identity, whatever that may be. If you are in the minority in a group, you are under scrutiny. And some of us on Zoom, we don't feel that as much, but when we're back in the room physically, we do. And so we may have gotten used to that over scrutiny of being the minority in a room, but forgotten about it. And so as a lot of people are coming back to work, I think there's a definite sense of having to get used to some of the things that they just shrugged off before because we forgot about them.
Yeah, agreed. It's funny. I'll tell you a quick funny anecdote from this week, and then we'll start to move towards close. So I was teaching, it was 2 days of an open enrollment executive education course. And the first day, so it's all these folks from different organizations, okay, different walks of life. And they're in the room together, no masks, okay, because
nice.
At Emory University, they removed the mask mandate this week, so no masks. And they just stared at me. The entire afternoon I taught, they just stared at me as if they were still on a Zoom call. I said, I'm a real person. You can ask me a question. You don't have to unmute. I'm right here. So it was funny. It took them a whole day to relearn how to actually be in a setting with other people and ask questions and not feel like they were stuck with a camera. It was fascinating. It really was.
And if it's that hard from that side of the classroom, of course it's hard from your side.
Oh, yeah, because I think one of the worst things that someone can do for you, I think it's Amy Cuddy at Harvard. She calls it emotional quicksand, social quicksand. She calls it social quicksand, which is just give somebody a blank stare. Just stare at them blankly while they're talking to you. No facial expression, complete flat affect. Just stare at them blankly. That creates this relational quicksand. People just, they don't know what to do. And so, I'm wondering, am I not doing this right? I used to be good at this. Maybe I've lost my ability to be good at this. Maybe I should just hang it all up.
No,
all that went through my head. No. In about the first 5 minutes.
We're going to name your inner imposter, and then you're going to text me when this happens. So stop right there.
Okay. The first name that came to mind for me, and I'm hoping it's not going to offend my family, is my littlest dog, Walter. We're going to call my inner imposter Walter. So
I love
Walter.
I love it.
Yeah. So
believe me, my dogs have never known imposter, but I totally understand.
So this conversation has been absolutely wonderful. I can't believe our time's already kind of wrapping up. So I always ask all my guests this one question on the Workplace Therapist podcast. What's one life hack you might have for us for how we can either have better conversations or healthier relationships, either at work or at home?
Stop crossing things off your to-do list. Instead, highlight them. Because at the end of the day, when we do the to-do list and all we then see if we're crossing things off is everything we didn't get to. But if we're highlighting them, then at the end of the day, we can say, here's what I accomplished and here's what I did. And if I could just do something small to move people into that, here's what I am accomplished and proud of versus here's what I haven't done, then I think we've gone in the right direction. So focus on the good stuff you did.
I love that idea. Yeah, I've got my to-do list right over here, and it's all this crossed off stuff. I'm going to try that.
You get highlighters in all the colors. It's good.
I know. So if people want to follow you or learn more about the work you do, where can they go?
LinkedIn is probably the place that's the most up to date. And so definitely, Carolyn Goerner, feel free to find me there. The website's really easy. It's just carolyngoerner.com. And so getting into that mode is useful. And that's where I do all of the, here's the books or different things that are coming out. So either LinkedIn or the website is typically the easiest place to find me.
Well, Carolyn, this has been an absolute joy. I could tell we could have talked for another hour. Yeah. If you're open to it, I'd love to have you back.
Oh, in a minute. Yes. Just tell me when.
That would be wonderful. Well, keep up all the great work you're doing. And I look forward to giving you an update on Walter next time we talk.
I'm looking forward to that as well. Thank you.
Didn't you love that conversation with Carolyn? I took away so many notes. So first, she reminds us right out of the gate, 70% of us are dealing with imposter syndrome. So odds are you talk to somebody else, they're going to have the same feelings about it. And then I asked her, what's the cost of imposter syndrome? And she said, well, there's 4. She said, first, we play small. We don't challenge ourselves. Second, we procrastinate. We don't even take on that thing that's in front of us. We put it off because we're afraid we're not going to do it well. Third, it creates stress and anxiety for us in our life. And then fourth, we don't even try new things because we're feeling so boxed in. We don't want to stretch ourselves, which then makes us even more rigid. And she said, when we're in that place, we're even less likely to give empathy to other people. So I said, Carolyn, what can we do to overcome it? And she said, first and foremost, talk about it. Find other people that know you well and talk to them about it so they can reassure you and give you that confidence. She said you can do other things like name it and write it down and even challenge yourself to try new things. But the starting place is talk about it. It helps us to feel like we're in this together and helps to relieve some of that pressure and strain, which I know we're all feeling coming out of this pandemic. And then finally, when she gave us our life hack, she said, you know what? Rather than having to-do lists where you scratch things off, have to-do lists where you highlight the things you accomplished. So that way, instead of looking at lists saying, here's all the stuff I still need to do, you're looking at a list saying, look at what I got done today. I'm enough after all. Nice way to wrap up our conversation. So take one of the nuggets from today, put it in place so you can start to hold your imposter syndrome at bay. So ultimately, we can not only have better working lives, but better lives overall.